A millionaire CEO saw a poor girl sleeping at a bus stop. By saying 3 words, she makes the CEO cry, and his life changes forever. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The November rain hammered against the windows of the black Mercedes as it glided through the wealthy district of Manhattan. Richard Sullivan, known to the business world as the ruthless CEO of Sullivan Enterprises, sat in the back seat, his steel-grey eyes scanning quarterly reports that would determine the fate of thousands of employees. At 55, Rick had built an empire worth $3 billion. But tonight something felt different. Tonight he felt empty. "Sir, there's unusual traffic ahead," his driver, James, announced through the intercom. "A water main break on 5th Avenue. We'll need to take the detour through the Lower East Side." Rick barely looked up. "Whatever gets us home faster." As the Mercedes turned into an unfamiliar neighborhood, Rick's attention was drawn from his papers by the stark contrast outside his window. Gone were the pristine sidewalks and luxury boutiques. Here, broken streetlights cast eerie shadows over cracked pavement, and homeless souls huddled in doorways, seeking shelter from the relentless rain. That's when he saw her. At the bus stop, underneath a flickering neon sign advertising cheap loans, sat the smallest figure Rick had ever seen. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, curled up on the cold metal bench. Her tiny frame was wrapped in what looked like an adult's oversized coat, torn and dirty. Her blonde hair, matted from the rain, fell across her face as she clutched a small teddy bear missing one eye. "Stop the car!" Rick commanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "Sir?" James questioned, glancing in the rearview mirror. "I said stop the car, now." The Mercedes pulled to the curb with a smooth hiss. Rick stepped out into the rain, his $1,000 suit immediately soaking through. He approached the bench slowly, unsure why this child had captured his attention so completely. As he drew closer, he could see her lips were blue from the cold, and her small body trembled with each breath. "Hey there," Rick said softly, crouching down to her level. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The little girl looked up, and Rick's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were the most startling shade of blue he'd ever seen, exactly like the eyes that haunted his dreams every night. The same eyes that had looked up at him from a hospital bed 3 years ago, before the machines went silent forever. "I'm waiting," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Waiting for what, sweetheart?" The child studied his face for a long moment, as if she were seeing something that others couldn't. Then, with tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks, she spoke 3 words that would shatter the wall Rick had built around his heart. "Daddy, is that you?" Rick Sullivan, the man who had fired thousands without blinking, who had destroyed competitors without mercy, who hadn't cried since his daughter Sarah's funeral, felt his knees buckle. Tears he thought had dried up forever began streaming down his face as he stared into those impossibly familiar blue eyes. In that moment, standing in the rain on a forgotten street corner, the most powerful man in New York realized that all his wealth, all his success, all his carefully constructed life meant absolutely nothing, because this little girl, this stranger, had just called him the one thing he thought he'd never be again: Daddy. Rick knelt in the rain, staring into those haunting blue eyes, his heart pounding like thunder in his chest. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Emma," she replied, clutching her one-eyed teddy bear tighter. "Emma Grace." The middle name hit Rick like a physical blow. Grace. That had been his wife Margaret's middle name, the same name they had planned to give their second child, before the accident took Margaret and left Sarah fighting cancer alone. "Emma, where are your parents?" Rick asked gently, removing his expensive jacket and wrapping it around her tiny shoulders. "Mama went to heaven last month," Emma said matter-of-factly, the way children speak of incomprehensible things. "The social lady said I have to go to a place with other kids, but I ran away. I don't like places with lots of people." Rick's mind raced. A runaway from the system. This was complicated, dangerous even. He should call the authorities, do the responsible thing. Instead, he found himself saying, "Would you like to come home with me tonight, just until we figure things out?" Emma studied his face again with those impossibly wise eyes. "You have the same sadness as me," she observed. "Mama said sad people need to help other sad people." As James drove them through the city, Rick couldn't stop stealing glances at Emma in the rearview mirror. She sat perfectly still, her small hand pressed against the window, watching the lights blur past. When they pulled into the circular driveway of Rick's Fifth Avenue penthouse, Emma's eyes widened. "Do you live in a castle?" she asked. For the first time in 3 years, Rick almost smiled. Something like that. Inside the marble foyer, Emma's presence transformed the cold, pristine space. Mrs. Chen, his longtime housekeeper, nearly dropped her cleaning supplies when she saw the small, damp figure beside her employer. "Mrs. Chen, this is Emma," Rick said. "She'll be staying with us tonight. Could you prepare the guest room and find some suitable clothes?" Mrs. Chen, who had worked for the Sullivan family for 20 years, asked no questions. She simply nodded and gently took Emma's hand. "Come, little one. Let's get you warm and dry." As they disappeared up the marble staircase, Rick collapsed into his leather chair, his hands shaking. The house felt different already. For 3 years, it had been a mausoleum of memories. Now, with Emma's soft footsteps echoing above, it felt almost alive again. But the rational part of his mind screamed warnings. What was he doing? He couldn't just take in a runaway child. There would be investigations, questions, complications he wasn't prepared to handle. Yet when Emma returned an hour later, wearing one of Mrs. Chen's oversized T-shirts like a dress, Rick knew he was already in too deep. "Mr. Rick," Emma said softly, "can I show you something?" She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a crumpled photograph. Rick's blood turned to ice. It was a picture of Sarah, his Sarah, taken at the hospital during her last week. But that was impossible. Emma couldn't have known Sarah. They had never met. "Where did you get this?" Rick whispered, his hands trembling as he took the photograph. Emma's blue eyes filled with tears. "The angel girl gave it to me in my dreams. She said her daddy was very sad and needed someone to love him again." The photograph trembled in Rick's hands as he stared at his daughter's face, frozen in time. Sarah's bright smile beamed up at him from the hospital bed, her bald head covered by the rainbow beanie he had bought her. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old in this picture, taken just weeks before she lost her battle with leukemia. "Emma," Rick said, his voice barely controlled, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened in your dream." Emma climbed onto the massive leather sofa beside him, her feet dangling high above the floor. "She came to me after Mama died. I was scared and alone in the big house with all the loud people. The angel girl sat on my bed and told me her name was Sarah." Rick's heart stopped. He had never told anyone outside his immediate family about Sarah's middle name, her favorite color, or the way she hummed while coloring. Yet somehow this strange little girl knew details that should have been impossible. "She told me her daddy built walls around his heart after she went to heaven," Emma continued, her small fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. "She said he forgot how to love because losing her hurt too much. But she's been watching over him, waiting for the right time to send help. And she told you to find me," Rick whispered. "She said I would know you by your eyes. They're the same color as hers when she was really sad. She said you would be driving in a big black car on a rainy night, and when I called you Daddy, you would remember what love feels like." Rick stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked Central Park. This was impossible. Grief hallucinations, that's what his therapist would call it. A grieving child projecting her need for a father onto a convenient stranger. But the photograph. How could she have the photograph? "Emma, this picture. Where exactly did you get it?" "Sarah gave it to me. She said it was taken on a Tuesday when the sun was trying to come out, but couldn't quite make it. She was wearing her favorite rainbow hat because it made her feel brave." Rick's legs nearly gave out. The rainbow beanie. Sarah had called it her brave hat. She wore it every Tuesday during chemo, her lucky day, because that's when Dr. Martinez always had the best news. No one else knew that detail. No one. His phone buzzed insistently. The caller ID showed Detective Morrison, NYPD Missing Persons. "Mr. Sullivan?" The detective's voice was professional but urgent. "I understand you may have information about a missing child named Emma Grace Winters. She disappeared from emergency foster care 3 days ago. The system shows a GPS ping from your neighborhood. Rick's blood turned cold. Detective, Sir, we need to speak with you immediately. This child is considered at risk, and there are protocols we must follow. I'm sending a unit to your address now. The line went dead. Rick stared at the phone, then at Emma, who was now curled up on the sofa, fast asleep, clutching both the photograph and her one-eyed teddy bear. In 20 minutes, they would come for her. They would take her back to the system, to another foster home, another temporary placement. The thought of Emma disappearing from his life as suddenly as she had entered it filled Rick with a panic he hadn't felt since watching Sarah's machines go silent. But how could he explain any of this? How could he tell the authorities that a 7-year-old girl claimed to be receiving messages from his dead daughter? How could he make them understand that in one night this child had awakened something in him that he thought had died forever? The doorbell rang, echoing through the cavernous penthouse like a death knell. Detective Morrison stood in Rick's marble foyer, his weathered face skeptical as he studied the opulent surroundings. Behind him, a child services worker named Janet Holloway clutched a thick manila folder, her sharp eyes already scanning for evidence of impropriety. "Mr. Sullivan," Detective Morrison began, "we appreciate your cooperation in this matter. However, we need to understand how a 7-year-old runaway ended up in your care." Rick had spent the 20 minutes before their arrival rehearsing his explanation, but now, faced with their probing stares, the words felt inadequate. "I found her at a bus stop during the storm. She was alone, soaking wet. I couldn't just leave a child in those conditions." "And you didn't think to call the authorities immediately?" Janet Holloway interjected, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Mr. Sullivan, taking an unaccompanied minor without proper notification is a serious matter." "I was going to call in the morning," Rick said, knowing how weak it sounded. "She was scared, cold. I thought one night of safety wouldn't hurt." Detective Morrison's radio crackled, and Emma appeared at the top of the marble staircase, rubbing her eyes. She wore Mrs. Chen's oversized shirt like a dress, her blonde hair tousled from sleep. "Emma," Janet said, her voice switching to the artificially bright tone adults use with children, "we've been looking for you, sweetheart. It's time to come with us." Emma's blue eyes filled with terror. She looked at Rick, then at the strangers, and suddenly bolted back upstairs. They heard a door slam, followed by muffled sobbing. "I'll get her," Janet said, starting toward the stairs. "Wait," Rick said firmly. "Let me talk to her first." "Mr. Sullivan," Detective Morrison warned, "you have no legal standing here. This child is a ward of the state." "5 minutes?" Rick pleaded. "She's scared. Let me explain what's happening." Janet checked her watch impatiently. 5 minutes? Then we're taking her, with or without cooperation. Rick found Emma locked in the guest bathroom, crying into her teddy bear. "Emma, it's Rick. Can you open the door?" "They're going to take me back," she sobbed, "to the place with the mean kids and the lady who smells like cigarettes. I don't want to go back there, Mr. Rick." Rick's heart shattered. He thought of Sarah, of all the times she had been brave in the face of pain and fear. "Emma, can you tell me more about what Sarah said, about why she sent you to find me?" The crying stopped. After a moment, the lock clicked, and Emma opened the door, her face streaked with tears. "She said you needed to learn something important," Emma whispered. "She said losing someone you love doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you love them differently, and that love can help other people. Emma, the people downstairs, they're here to take you to a safe place." "But I'm safe with you," Emma said simply. "Sarah told me I would be. She said you would protect me like you protected her." Rick knelt down, taking Emma's small hands in his. "What if I told you that I'm going to fight for you, that I'm going to find a way for you to stay safe?" "You would do that?" "I promise you, Emma Grace. I will not let you disappear into a system that doesn't understand how special you are." When they returned downstairs, Rick's demeanor had changed completely. The broken, grieving father was gone, replaced by the steel-sharp businessman who had built an empire through sheer determination. "Detective Morrison, Ms. Holloway," Rick said, his voice carrying the authority that had intimidated Fortune 500 CEOs. "I want to discuss emergency foster placement procedures. Specifically, I want to apply to become Emma's temporary guardian." Janet Holloway actually laughed. "Mr. Sullivan, the process takes months. Background checks, home studies, psychological evaluations. You can't just decide to become a foster parent overnight." Rick pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Patricia, it's Rick Sullivan. I need you to drop everything and meet me at my apartment. Bring the family law team. Yes, tonight. Because I'm about to wage the most important legal battle of my life." He hung up and looked directly at Emma, who was watching from the staircase. "Sometimes, Emma, when you want to protect someone you love, you have to fight the whole world." But what Rick didn't know was that across town, in a dim social services office, someone was already building a case against him. Someone who had been watching the Sullivan family for years, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Patricia Lawson, Manhattan's most feared family attorney, arrived at Rick's penthouse with a team of 3 lawyers and enough legal documents to start a small library. At 62, Patricia had never lost a custody case, and her reputation for destroying opponents in court was legendary. "Rick," she said, settling into his study while her team spread files across his mahogany desk, "what you're proposing is legal suicide. Emergency foster care doesn't work like a business acquisition. You can't just throw money at the problem." "Then what can I do?" Rick demanded, pacing behind his desk. "That little girl upstairs has been through hell. I won't let her go back to a system that's already failed her." Patricia studied the child services report Janet Holloway had reluctantly provided. Emma Grace Winters, mother deceased from cancer, father unknown. She's been in 3 different foster homes in the past month. The last family returned her to the state, claiming she had disturbing behavioral issues. What kind of issues? According to this, Emma talks to an imaginary friend named Sarah. She draws pictures of things that haven't happened yet, and she allegedly told her last foster mother that her husband was going to have a heart attack. He did, 2 days later. Rick's blood chilled. Sarah, Emma was talking to Sarah. "There's more," Patricia continued grimly. "The state has red-flagged her file. They're recommending psychological evaluation and possible placement in a specialized facility for emotionally disturbed children." "Over my dead body," Rick growled. "Rick, listen to me. There's something else you need to know." Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper. "The caseworker assigned to Emma, Janet Holloway, she's not just any social worker. She's the same woman who handled Sarah's case when Margaret died." Rick stopped pacing. "That's impossible. Sarah was never in the system." "No, but Janet was involved in the investigation after Margaret's accident. She recommended that Sarah be removed from your care during your grief counseling period. The recommendation was overruled, but Janet has held a grudge against your family ever since." The pieces began falling into place. Janet's suspicious behavior, her obvious hostility, the way she seemed determined to take Emma away despite Rick's resources and willingness to help. "She's targeting Emma to get back at me," Rick realized. "It appears so. And Rick, there's more. Janet has been building a case against you specifically. She's documented every public appearance you've made since Sarah's death, every business decision, every interview where you seemed emotionally detached. She's going to argue that you're psychologically unfit to care for a traumatized child." A soft knock interrupted them. Emma stood in the doorway, her teddy bear clutched tightly to her chest. "Mr. Rick, Sarah wants me to tell you something important." Patricia's eyebrows shot up, but Rick motioned for her to remain silent. "What does she want you to tell me, Emma?" "She says the mean lady isn't just trying to take me away. She's trying to hurt you because she couldn't hurt you before. But Sarah says you're stronger now because you have something to fight for again." Emma walked to Rick's desk and picked up a pen. Without hesitation, she began drawing on the back of one of Patricia's legal documents. Her small hand moved with startling precision, creating an image that made Patricia gasp. It was a perfect sketch of Sarah Sullivan, down to the tiny scar on her chin from a childhood fall. But Emma had never seen Sarah except in dreams and the photograph. "Sarah says to tell you that love never really dies," Emma continued, still drawing. "It just changes shape. And sometimes it comes back in ways you don't expect." Patricia stared at the drawing, then at Emma, then at Rick. "How is this possible?" Before Rick could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Sullivan, This is Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Sarah's former oncologist. I hope you'll forgive me for calling so late, but something extraordinary has happened. I received a call tonight from a child named Emma, asking me to verify a story she wanted to tell you. Mr. Sullivan, this child knows details about Sarah's treatment that were never written down anywhere, details that only Sarah, you and I ever knew. Rick's hands began to shake. What kind of details? She knew about the song Sarah hummed during her chemo sessions. She knew about the deal Sarah made with me about being brave if I promised to take care of you after she was gone. Mr. Sullivan, no one else knew about that conversation. No one. The line went quiet except for Dr. Martinez's shaky breathing. Doctor, Rick said slowly, what else did Emma tell you? She said Sarah asked her to give you a message, that it's time to stop building walls and start building bridges. And Mr. Sullivan, she said Sarah is proud of the man you're becoming. As Rick hung up the phone, he looked at Emma, who was now adding final touches to her drawing of Sarah. In the corner of the sketch, she had written 3 words in a child's careful handwriting. Love never dies. But outside Rick's penthouse, Janet Holloway sat in her car, speaking urgently into her phone. Yes, Judge Crawford, I have sufficient evidence to recommend immediate removal. The child is clearly being coached, and Mr. Sullivan is exploiting her trauma for his own psychological needs. Yes, I can have the emergency order ready by morning. At 6 a.m., Rick's doorbell rang with the insistence of disaster. Through the security monitor, he saw Janet Holloway standing with 2 police officers and a man in an expensive suit. Rick recognized him immediately. Judge Crawford, the family court judge notorious for his harsh rulings and rumored corruption. Mr. Sullivan, Judge Crawford announced as Rick opened the door, we have an emergency court order for the immediate removal of Emma Grace Winters from your care. The child is to be transported to Riverside Behavioral Center for comprehensive psychological evaluation. Riverside? Rick's blood turned to ice. Riverside was where they sent the children the system had given up on. Judge Crawford, I have legal representation. Any action requires. The order is effective immediately, Janet interrupted, pushing past Rick into his foyer. Emma needs professional help, not the fantasy enablement you're providing. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her small hands gripping the banister. Mr. Rick, what's happening? It's okay, sweetheart, Rick called up to her. Though nothing about this was okay, just stay where you are. But Emma began walking down the stairs, her blue eyes fixed on Judge Crawford, with an intensity that made the man visibly uncomfortable. You're the bad judge, Emma said matter-of-factly as she reached the bottom step. Sarah told me about you. Judge Crawford's face darkened. Young lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but she said you took money to send kids away from families who loved them, Emma continued, her voice carrying an eerie calm. She said you did it to her daddy's friend a long time ago, and now you're trying to do it to me. The color drained from Judge Crawford's face. Rick saw something flicker in the man's eyes, fear, recognition, guilt. What is she talking about? Rick demanded. Emma walked directly to Judge Crawford, her small frame fearless before his imposing presence. Sarah says to tell you that Tommy Henderson says hello. Judge Crawford staggered backward as if he'd been struck. Tommy Henderson had been Rick's business partner's son, taken from his loving father in a custody battle 15 years ago. The boy had died in state care 6 months later. Judge Crawford had ruled against the father despite overwhelming evidence, and rumors had circulated for years about payoffs and corruption in that case. That's impossible, Judge Crawford whispered. No one knows about. She couldn't know. Emma reached into her small backpack and pulled out another photograph, this one yellowed with age. It showed Rick, his former business partner David Henderson, and their families at a company picnic. In the photo, Sarah and Tommy played together in the background, both of them laughing, both of them alive. Sarah says she and Tommy have been trying to fix what you broke, Emma said softly. They've been waiting for someone strong enough to fight back. Sarah says her daddy is finally ready. Rick stared at the photograph. He remembered that day, the last time both families had been together. David had died in a car accident just months after losing Tommy, his grief too overwhelming to bear. Where did you get this? Rick asked Emma. Sarah gave it to me. She said to show it to the bad judge when he came to take me away. She said it would remind him of what happens when good people don't fight for what's right. Judge Crawford was backing toward the door, his face pale and sweating. This is some kind of trick. Janet, we're leaving. Now. But Janet Holloway was staring at Emma with a different expression entirely. For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. Emma, Janet said slowly, how do you know about Tommy Henderson? Because he and Sarah are friends in heaven, Emma replied simply. They've been working together to find people who need help. Tommy wanted to save other kids like him, and Sarah wanted to help her daddy learn to love again. Janet's tough demeanor began to crack. The Henderson case. I was just starting out then. I recommended against the removal, but Judge Crawford overruled me. I've regretted that decision for 15 years. Judge Crawford spun around, his face contorted with panic and rage. Janet, don't listen to this nonsense. It's all coincidence and manipulation. But Emma walked to Janet and took her hand. Sarah says you're not a bad person. She says you've been trying to protect kids but got lost in the rules. She says it's not too late to do the right thing. Janet knelt down to Emma's level, tears beginning to form in her eyes. What else does Sarah say? She says her daddy isn't trying to replace her with me. He's trying to honor her by protecting someone who needs protecting. She says love isn't supposed to hurt people. It's supposed to heal them. Janet looked up at Rick, then at Judge Crawford, who was now frantically whispering into his phone. Something fundamental shifted in her expression. Judge Crawford, Janet said, standing slowly, I'm recommending that Emma remain in Mr. Sullivan's care pending a full review. This emergency order was premature. You can't do that, Crawford snarled. I have the authority. Actually, Patricia Lawson said, stepping through the front door with her legal team behind her, you don't. We've just filed a federal complaint against you for judicial misconduct in the Henderson case and 17 others. The FBI would like to have a word with you, Judge Crawford. As FBI agents appeared behind Patricia, Judge Crawford's world collapsed around him. But Emma simply walked to Rick and took his hand. Sarah says the hard part is over, she whispered. Now comes the good part. For the first time since his daughter's death, Rick Sullivan felt hope beginning to bloom in his chest. 3 weeks after Judge Crawford's arrest made national headlines, Rick's penthouse had undergone a remarkable transformation. The cold marble halls now echoed with Emma's laughter, and child-safe furniture appeared alongside his priceless art collection. Mrs. Chen hummed while preparing Emma's favorite pancakes, and for the first time in years, the house felt like a home. Patricia called this morning, Rick told Emma over breakfast. The adoption paperwork has been fast-tracked. Judge Morrison, the good judge, wants to meet with us next week. Emma looked up from her pancakes, syrup decorating her chin. What's adoption mean? Rick knelt beside her chair, choosing his words carefully. It means you would officially become my daughter, forever. No one could ever take you away again. Like Sarah was your daughter. Yes, sweetheart, like Sarah. Emma was quiet for a moment, then reached over and took Rick's hand. Mr. Rick, can I tell you something Sarah said last night? Rick had grown accustomed to Emma's nightly conversations with his deceased daughter, Dr. T. Martinez had explained that children often process trauma through imaginative play, but the accuracy of Emma's knowledge continued to baffle everyone. She said she's not jealous of me being your new daughter. She said love gets bigger when you share it, not smaller. Rick felt tears prick his eyes. She's right about that. And she said to tell you that Mama Margaret is proud of you too. She says you're finally becoming the daddy she always knew you could be. Rick froze. Emma had never mentioned Margaret before. His wife's name had never come up in any of their conversations. Emma, how do you know about Margaret? Sarah talks about her all the time. She says Mama Margaret helped her not be scared when she was dying, and now they both watch over you together. Before Rick could respond, his phone rang. Detective Morrison's name appeared on the screen. Mr. Sullivan, we need to talk. It's about Emma's background. Can you come to the precinct today? What kind of background information? The kind that changes everything. Bring your lawyer. The manila folder Detective Morrison placed on the conference table was thicker than a phone book. Patricia sat beside Rick, her expression growing more concerned with each page she turned. Mr. Sullivan, Detective Morrison began, We've completed our investigation into Emma's family history. What we found is unusual. How unusual? Rick asked. Emma's mother, Linda Winters, died of cancer last month, as we knew, but what we didn't know is that Linda worked as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital for 6 years. The same hospital where your daughter Sarah was treated. Rick's world tilted. That's impossible, I would have remembered her. Linda worked the night shift in the children's oncology ward. According to hospital records, she specifically requested to be assigned to Sarah's care team during the final weeks. Patricia leaned forward. Detective, what are you implying? Linda kept detailed journals which we found in her apartment. She wrote extensively about Sarah Sullivan, describing her as the bravest little girl I've ever known. But here's the strange part. Linda was pregnant during the time she cared for Sarah. Emma was born 3 months after Sarah passed away. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Rick struggled to process what he was hearing. Are you saying Linda knew Sarah personally? More than that, Detective Morrison continued. According to Linda's journals, Sarah talked about you constantly, about how much she loved you, how worried she was about leaving you alone. Linda became emotionally attached to Sarah's case in a way that was professionally concerning. Patricia's legal instincts kicked in. Detective, where is this leading? Linda's final journal entry, written the day before she died, contains some disturbing information. She believed that Emma was somehow meant to find you. She called it Sarah's final gift and claimed that Sarah had been visiting Emma in dreams since birth. Rick felt the blood drain from his face. She knew? Linda knew Emma was seeing Sarah? According to her writings, yes, and there's more. Linda left specific instructions that if anything happened to her, Emma was to be placed in a foster system that would eventually lead her to you. She somehow manipulated the placement process to ensure Emma would end up in the Lower East Side on that specific night. The implications crashed over Rick like a tidal wave. Emma hadn't found him by accident. Her presence at that bus stop, her escape from foster care, even her route through his neighborhood, it had all been orchestrated. Detective, Patricia said carefully, are you suggesting that Linda Winters deliberately engineered this entire situation? I'm saying that Linda believed she was fulfilling a promise she made to a dying child. Whether that makes her heroic or delusional, I can't say. But one thing is certain. Emma didn't end up in your life by chance. Rick stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Has Emma been told any of this? No, and Mr. Sullivan, there's one more thing. Linda's medical records show she had the same rare blood type as your daughter Sarah, the same blood type as Emma. The genetic odds of that are astronomical. Rick turned back to the detective, his mind reeling. What are you saying? I'm saying we might want to consider DNA testing. Linda's journals reference a connection deeper than duty between herself and Sarah. There might be family relationships we haven't uncovered yet. Patricia gathered the papers with shaking hands. Detective Morrison, this information cannot leave this room until we understand what we're dealing with. Agreed, but Mr. Sullivan, you need to decide how much of this to tell Emma. That little girl has been carrying some heavy secrets, and she might know more about her mother's plans than she's letting on. As they left the precinct, Rick felt everything he thought he understood about Emma shifting beneath his feet. Had Emma been manipulating him from the beginning? Or was she an innocent child caught in her dying mother's elaborate scheme? But the biggest question remained. If Linda had orchestrated everything, how had she known that Emma would genuinely be able to connect with Sarah's spirit, unless the connection was real after all? That evening, Rick found Emma in his study, drawing in the sketchbook he had bought her. She looked up as he entered, her blue eyes searching his face with that uncanny intuition that always unnerved him. You're sad again, she observed. Did someone tell you something bad about me? Rick sat down beside her, struggling with how much truth a 7-year-old could handle. Emma, can you tell me about your mama? What she told you about? About me? Emma set down her crayon and climbed into Rick's lap, a gesture that still filled him with wonder and terror in equal measure. Mama was sad all the time after she got sick, Emma said softly. She cried when she thought I wasn't looking, but she told me stories about a little girl named Sarah who was very brave when she was sick. What kind of stories? Sarah told Mama that her daddy was the best daddy in the whole world, but he was going to forget how to be happy when she went to heaven. Mama said Sarah made her promise to take care of her daddy if she could. Rick's throat tightened. Did your mama tell you to look for me? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small fingers tracing patterns on his shirt. Mama said sometimes angels send people to help other people. She said if I ever needed a daddy, Sarah would help me find one who knew how to love kids who were sad. Emma, did you know your mama worked at the hospital where Sarah was sick? Mama helped Sarah not be scared at night time. Sarah told me that. Emma looked up at him with those impossibly wise eyes. Mr. Rick, are you worried that I'm not really supposed to be here? The question pierced right through to Rick's deepest fear. What if this whole situation was built on manipulation and delusion? What if he was being played by a grieving nurse's desperate scheme? I'm worried that maybe you're here for the wrong reasons, Rick admitted. Emma studied his face with the intensity of someone far older than 7. Can I show you something? She climbed down and retrieved her sketchbook, flipping to a page Rick had never seen. It was a drawing of 2 women standing together, one wearing a nurse's uniform, the other in a simple dress. Both were smiling, and above them, 2 little girls held hands. That's Mama and Sarah's mama, Emma explained. Sarah showed me this picture in my dreams. She said they're friends now and they both want us to be a family. Rick stared at the drawing. Margaret had died when Sarah was 4, years before Sarah's cancer diagnosis. Emma couldn't possibly know what Margaret looked like. Emma, how do you know what Margaret looked like? Sarah showed me. She said Mama Margaret has been helping her watch over you. She said Mama Margaret was the one who helped Mama Linda understand what she needed to do. Rick felt reality shifting again. Either Emma was the most sophisticated manipulator he'd ever encountered, or something beyond his understanding was truly happening. Mr. Rick, Emma said, climbing back into his lap, do you not want me to be your daughter anymore? The question hit him like a physical blow. Looking into Emma's eyes, Rick realized that regardless of how she had come into his life, the love he felt for her was absolutely real. She had brought light back into his darkness, purpose back into his existence. Emma Grace, Rick said, pulling her close, I want you to be my daughter more than anything in the world. I don't care how you found me or why. I only care that you're here now. Emma smiled and hugged him tightly. Sarah says that's the right answer. But later that night, as Rick tucked Emma into bed, she whispered something that made his blood run cold. Mr. Rick, Sarah says someone is still trying to hurt us. She says the bad people aren't done yet, and you need to be very careful. What bad people, sweetheart? The ones who didn't want Judge Crawford to get in trouble. Sarah says they're angry now and they're going to try to take me away again. Rick's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging, or the girl disappears forever. The black SUV had been parked across from Rick's building for 3 days. Patricia's security team confirmed what Rick already suspected. He and Emma were being watched. The text messages had escalated from threats to specific details about Emma's daily routine, proving that whoever was behind this had intimate knowledge of their lives. We need to consider protective custody, Patricia urged during their emergency meeting. Rick, Judge Crawford was just the tip of the iceberg. Our investigation has uncovered a network of corruption that goes back decades. Judges, social workers, even some law enforcement. They've been trafficking children through the system for years. Rick paced his study while Emma played in the next room, seemingly oblivious to the danger surrounding them. How deep does this go? Deep enough that the FBI has taken over the investigation. Rick, Emma isn't just a witness to their crimes, she's evidence of their entire operation. They can't afford to let her testify. Then we disappear. I have resources, safe houses. Running makes you look guilty, and Emma needs stability, not a life in hiding. A soft knock interrupted them. Emma peered around the door, her teddy bear clutched in one hand, her sketchbook in the other. Mr. Rick, Sarah needs to show you something very important. Rick and Patricia exchanged glances. Emma's messages from Sarah had been uncannily accurate so far. What does she want to show me, sweetheart? Emma opened her sketchbook to a fresh page, revealing a detailed drawing that made Patricia gasp. It showed a man in a business suit standing over a desk covered with photographs of children. In the corner, barely visible, was a distinctive scar running down the man's left hand. Sarah says this is the man who's been watching us. She says he has pictures of lots of kids who went missing. She says he's the one who really ran the bad business, not Judge Crawford. Patricia stared at the drawing, her face pale. Emma, have you ever seen this man before? In person? No, Sarah showed him to me. She says he's very dangerous, but he made one big mistake. What mistake? Rick asked. Emma flipped to another page, revealing a drawing of a building with a distinctive architectural feature, a gargoyle perched above the entrance. He keeps all his bad papers in a building with a stone monster. Sarah says the monster watches over secrets, but it can't hide them from angels. Patricia's hands began shaking. Rick, I know this building. It's the Cromwell building downtown. That's where David Blackwood has his private office. Who's David Blackwood? He's been Judge Crawford's biggest campaign contributor for 15 years, owns half the real estate in the judicial district. If there's a corruption network, he'd be the money behind it. Emma looked up at Rick with those penetrating blue eyes. Sarah says Mr. Blackwood doesn't know that Mama Linda copied all his papers before she died. She says Mama hid them somewhere safe for you to find. What papers, Emma? The ones that show where all the lost children went. Mama Linda was helping him for a while, but then she found out what he was really doing to the kids. That's when she decided to save me and find you. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Linda Winters hadn't just been a grieving nurse trying to fulfill a dying child's wish. She had been an insider in a criminal organization who chose to expose everything to protect her daughter. Emma, Patricia said gently, do you know where your mama hid these papers? Emma nodded and walked to Rick's desk. She picked up a pen and wrote an address in her careful child's handwriting. Storage Unit 247, Metro Self-Storage, 42nd Street. Mama gave me this address in a dream after she died. She said to only tell you when the bad man started watching us. Rick stared at the address, then at Emma. Sweetheart, your mama was very brave. She was trying to protect you and a lot of other children. I know, Emma said simply. That's why Sarah chose her to help. Sarah says good people have to stick together to beat the bad people. Patricia was already on her phone, coordinating with the FBI. But as she spoke, Rick noticed Emma's expression change. Her face went pale, and she dropped her teddy bear. Mr. Rick, she whispered urgently, Sarah says they're coming now, tonight. We have to go to the safe place. Before Rick could ask what she meant, the building's fire alarm began blaring. Through the window, Rick saw smoke beginning to pour from the building's lower floors. It wasn't an accident. David Blackwood had decided that if he couldn't silence Emma quietly, he would eliminate her along with any evidence of his crimes. But as Rick scooped Emma into his arms and ran for the emergency staircase, he didn't know that across town FBI agents were already breaking down the door to Storage Unit 247. The game was far from over. The safe house Patricia had arranged was a modest apartment in Queens, worlds away from Rick's luxurious penthouse. As sirens wailed in the distance and news reports showed his building evacuated, but thankfully undamaged, Rick held Emma close on the unfamiliar couch. The fire was just a distraction, Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI explained. Blackwood's people used the evacuation to break into your apartment. They were looking for Emma, but our security detail got you out in time. What did you find in the storage unit? Rick asked. Agent Chen's expression was grim. Enough evidence to bring down a child trafficking ring that's been operating for 20 years. Financial records, photographs, even recorded phone conversations. Linda Winters documented everything. Emma looked up from her coloring book. Mama was very smart. She pretended to help the bad man so she could learn all his secrets. Emma, Agent Chen said gently, your mother was incredibly brave. The evidence she gathered will save dozens of children. I know. Sarah told me Mama was a hero. Agent Chen glanced at Rick, clearly unsure how to respond to Emma's supernatural claims. The thing is, we need Emma to testify. Her mother's evidence is powerful, but Emma is the only living witness to some of Blackwood's operations. Rick felt his protective instincts flare. She's 7 years old. I won't let you put her through that trauma. Mr. Sullivan, I understand your concerns, but... No, Emma interrupted softly. It's okay, Mr. Rick. Sarah says this is why I was supposed to find you, not just to help you be happy again, but to help stop the bad man from hurting more kids. Rick knelt beside Emma's chair. "Sweetheart, you don't have to do anything that scares you." "I'm not scared," Emma said, her voice carrying a strength that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Sarah will be with me, and you'll be with me, and Mama will be watching from heaven to make sure I say everything right." Agent Chen's radio crackled. "We've got Blackwood in custody. But, ma'am, you need to know. He's demanding to speak with Emma personally. Says he has information about other children that he'll only share with her." "Absolutely not," Rick said immediately. But Emma stood up, her small frame radiating determination. "Mr. Rick, what if he knows where the other kids are? What if they're still trapped somewhere?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rick thought of all the children who might still be suffering, all the families torn apart by Blackwood's network. "There would be conditions," Agent Chen said carefully. "Full protection, video surveillance, psychological support, and you would be right there with her, Mr. Sullivan." Emma walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. When she turned back, her blue eyes held a resolution that reminded Rick painfully of Sarah. "Sarah says this is the last thing I have to do to keep other kids safe. After this, we can just be a normal family." Rick felt his heart breaking and swelling simultaneously. This little girl, who had already endured so much, was willing to face her demons one more time to protect others. "Okay," Rick said finally, "but I don't leave her side for even a second." Agent Chen nodded. "The meeting is set for tomorrow morning. Mr. Sullivan, after this is over, the adoption proceedings can move forward without any impediments. Emma will officially become your daughter." That night, as Rick tucked Emma into the unfamiliar bed, she reached up and touched his face with her small hand. "Mr. Rick, are you proud of me?" "Emma Grace, I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. Even Sarah." Rick smiled through his tears. Sarah would be so proud of her little sister. Emma's face lit up with pure joy. "Sister? Really?" "Really. You're both my daughters now. Nothing will ever change that." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Rick sat beside her bed, watching over her in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation with David Blackwood. Tomorrow they would learn the full extent of the horrors Emma's mother had died trying to expose. But tonight, for the first time since Sarah's death, Rick Sullivan felt complete. He had found his purpose again, and it was sleeping peacefully in the bed beside him. The broken man who had found a little girl at a bus stop was gone forever. In his place was a father ready to move heaven and earth to protect his daughter, both daughters, from anyone who would try to harm them. The Federal Detention Center felt like stepping into a tomb. David Blackwood sat behind reinforced glass, his once powerful demeanor reduced to that of a cornered animal. The distinctive scar on his left hand was exactly as Emma had drawn it, and when he saw her enter the visitation room, his eyes filled with something that looked almost like fear. "You brought the child," Blackwood said, his voice crackling through the intercom. "Good. We have much to discuss." Rick sat beside Emma, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Agent Chen monitored from the corner while cameras recorded every word. "Mr. Blackwood," Emma said with startling composure, "Sarah says you've been hurting kids for a very long time." Blackwood's face went pale. "How could you possibly know about—" He stopped himself, studying Emma's face with growing unease. "You have her eyes." "Whose eyes?" Rick demanded. Blackwood ignored him, focusing entirely on Emma. "Tell me, child, what else does your imaginary friend Sarah tell you?" Emma's blue eyes held steady. "She says you remember another little girl with eyes like mine, a long time ago. A little girl you hurt so badly that she never got to grow up." The blood drained from Blackwood's face completely. "That's impossible. No one knows about—" "She couldn't. Sarah says her name was Grace. Grace Sullivan. She would have been your daughter's age if you hadn't killed her." Rick felt the world stop spinning. Grace Sullivan, his sister, his baby sister, who had disappeared when she was 7 years old, 30 years ago. The case that had never been solved. The tragedy that had driven his parents to early graves and shaped his entire life. "Grace," Rick whispered, his voice breaking. "My sister, Grace." Blackwood's composure cracked completely. "It was an accident. I was young, stupid. I never meant for her to die. But she saw too much. Knew too much about my father's business. I couldn't let her. You monster. Rick lunged forward, but Agent Chen restrained him. Emma stood up calmly and walked to the glass. Mr. Blackwood, Grace forgives you. Sarah told me that. But she says you have to tell us where the other children are, the ones who are still alive. Why should I help you? Blackwood snarled. Because Grace and Sarah are going to keep visiting you in your dreams until you do the right thing, Emma said simply. And they're going to bring all the other children you hurt. You'll never sleep peacefully again unless you help save the ones you can still save. Blackwood stared at Emma in terror, then began sobbing uncontrollably. The warehouse on Pier 47. There are 12 children there. I was going to. God help me. I was going to ship them overseas tomorrow. Agent Chen was already on her radio, coordinating the rescue operation. Within minutes, sirens were screaming toward the waterfront. There's something else, Blackwood whispered through his tears. Your sister Grace. Before she died, she made me promise something. She said if I ever had the chance to save another child, I had to take it. She said love was stronger than fear, and that someday someone would come to remind me of that promise. Emma pressed her small hand against the glass. Grace kept her promise. She sent me to remind you. Sarah says it's never too late to choose love over fear. Later that evening, as news reports celebrated the rescue of 12 children from Pier 47, Rick sat in Judge Morrison's chambers holding Emma's adoption papers. The final signatures made it official. Emma Grace Sullivan was legally his daughter. You know, Judge Morrison said, in 30 years on the bench, I've never seen a case like this. It's almost like fate brought you two together. Emma looked up at Rick with those impossibly blue eyes, the same eyes as his lost sister Grace, the same eyes as his departed daughter Sarah. Not fate, Emma said softly. Love. Love brought us together. As they walked home through Central Park, Emma stopped suddenly and pointed to a bench overlooking the pond. Look, Daddy, she whispered. Rick looked but saw nothing unusual, just an empty bench in the fading evening light. What am I looking at, sweetheart? Sarah and Grace and Mama Margaret and Mama Linda. They're all sitting together watching us. Sarah says they're proud of us. She says we did good. Rick knelt down and hugged Emma tightly. We're going to be okay, aren't we? Better than okay, Emma said, hugging him back. We're going to be a family, a real family. As they walked toward their new life together, Rick felt a presence he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, peace. His daughter Sarah had kept her promise. She had sent him someone to love, someone who needed protecting, someone who would help him remember that love never really dies. It just changes shape. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it comes back in ways more beautiful than you ever imagined possible. In the end, 3 words had changed everything. Daddy, is that you? But the 3 words that would sustain them forever were even simpler. Love never dies. Rick Sullivan had lost one daughter to death, but gained another through Grace. And somewhere in the space between grief and joy, between ending and beginning, he finally understood that family isn't just about blood or biology. Family is about love. And love, once it touches your heart, never truly leaves. It just keeps growing, one precious soul at a time.